Hello and welcome to the Schola Progenium. Today I'm going to be talking to you about quite an interesting topic, which is how to win a battle when you're going to essentially be fighting an uphill struggle. When you've set your opponent, your forces up, and you look at your opponent's forces and you think to yourself, Emperor, protect me. This is going to be a tough one. You know, that could be knights, it could be custodes, it could be just your everyday Space Marine force. And that's the problem. At the moment, you know, every man and his dog has collected Space Marines at some point. And a lot of people are dusting off their old Astartes armies and making use of those tactical doctrines, making use of those updates, those codexes, those expansions, so to speak, and adding a few more models to their collection and making some really devastating forces. And as Blood Angels, and for a variety of other armies out there, this is an uphill struggle. We are fighting against a superior opponent a lot of the time. Now, this isn't how to write a list specifically to fight against those opponents, because you could be finding yourself in a tournament where you're facing off against a variety of opponents. But what this is a combination of strategies and a mindset that you need to have when you're facing off against an opponent such as this, so that you can make sure that you win the game. Now, this is conventionally known as playing to the objectives. And it's easy for someone to just throw out that bit of advice. When you're facing off against four knights, and you think, and someone says to yourself, "Oh, just play to the objectives." You think to yourself, "Well, thanks, but how can I do that? What am I going to do? My opponent, every time that I put something in range, my opponent's going to destroy it. Every time I expose myself, my opponent's going to destroy me. So what can I do? Well, what you can do is you can fight asymmetrically. You can fight in such a way that you refuse to actually give battle to your opponent in the way that they want you to. Because remember, they will have this big, scary unit or variety of units, and potentially, it relies on, 2 or 3 different stratagems and, a couple of different buff characters combined with a couple of dangerous units. And, it's this clever combination that their army is built around. And essentially, for them to win the game, they have to use that combo. They have to use their forces in a certain way. They have to shoot you to death and slam you with their knights. So just don't let them. And this most certainly has a historical pretext. You think about Hannibal, the ultimate defeat of Hannibal at the hands of the Romans. Now, Hannibal wasn't properly defeated. He was on several occasions, but and I'm not going to give you a history lesson here, but essentially, the Romans found themselves in a position that they weren't used to, whereby normally their forces were the best equipped and the best tactically and the best trained, and they were often able to just fight and destroy their opponents without much worry. But every time they faced off against Hannibal, a lot of the time, he would just decimate their forces and wreck them, and ultimately he was defeated by them refusing to properly give him battle and sort of just running around Italy, for a while, until he was unable to actually take on Rome because his forces were depleted, and he wouldn't have been able to hold such a big city. And as I said, I'm not going to give you a massive history lesson, but essentially the Romans had to change their tune and totally change their mindset and totally change their approach to warfare in order to overcome this threat that they weren't able to beat with their normal approach. And that's the situation you're in. You can't just charge their lines. You can't use your death company to assault their most powerful unit, because their most powerful unit's a knight, for example, and you'll bounce off. Or, you can assault them, but, you're not going to get very far. There's a variety of different situations that you'll find yourself in where what you want to do normally is not going to get you a victory. Just face that fact. If you fight head-to-head against your opponent, you do a battle, you use your good units to kill them, they use their good units to kill you, they're going to kill you more, and they're going to win. If you're in that situation, this is what you need to do. And for more historical context or pretext, just pick your 20th or 21st century war, because a lot of them involve a vastly superior force that is better equipped, and just more able to win an out-and-out battle, facing off against an opponent that is not as well equipped, is not as able to give battle, so they just don't. And instead, they fight on their terms. So first things first, let's look at how we can categorize the units in our lists, whatever our list may be, into certain chunks that will do certain things so that we can play to the objectives and win this battle. Now, I categorize my units in my head into 3 broad sections, and I use those different sections to do different things. Because remember, my Bile Predator in this context is not there for shooting anymore. It's not a Dakar tank anymore. It has a new job. My Tactical Marines are not there to necessarily get into an exchange of firefight with other OBSEC units or other, infantry units, because they're going to lose that firefight because I'm facing off against Astartes Tactical Marines with tactical doctrines, or whatever the context may be. I'm going to use my units in a different way. So what are these 3 categories? Well, the first one is the fast and hard hitting units, and they don't necessarily need to be tough, but they need to be able to get where they are needed, when they're needed to be there, and they need to be able to do the damage that you need to do when it needs to be done. So they need to be able to hit hard and hit fast, and it doesn't really matter what happens to them in the process. If they die, they die. You've then got your lockdown units, your anchor units. Now, these guys can just basically take control of objectives or add their meat to an area of the battlefield that you think is going to take some heavy firepower from your opponent. And they're there to just absorb firepower. So you may find that as the game develops over the first 2 or 3 turns, that your opponent is ignoring an area of the battlefield, and they may not necessarily be able to get back to it because of the speed of their models or something like that. You force them to reposition and they won't be able to get back somewhere. So you might drop a unit of, let's say, Hammernators, Storm Shield Terminators, onto that objective. Now, those Termies are not really going to be able to do much assault. They'll be able to defend themselves really well if your opponent goes for them. Not going to be able to do much assaulting this game, but that doesn't matter to you, because what you actually need to do is just hold that objective and maybe defend it if it's a Maelstrom game, or for whatever reason you just need a tough unit that can't be shifted without a massive focus of your opponent's forces. And hopefully your opponent won't be able to bring those forces to bear because of the combination of strategies that we're going to discuss in this video. So they're your lockdown or anchor units. They take control of the battlefield and they absorb firepower when you need them to. Then you've got your filler units. Now, these can be units that are fast, units that are tough, units that are cheap, units that have firepower. They can be basically any unit. But in the context of this battle, the situation you're finding yourself in, they can't do what they would normally do. As I mentioned, a Bile Predator, that, its Dakar really isn't going to be useful because you're facing off against a pure knight army. Your shooting units are still your shooting units, and they still need to be able to target things opportunistically. But these filler units, they're going to have a variety of much more important jobs. So essentially, in terms of target priority with these guys, you just need to do damage when and where you can. That's not their focus. Their focus is essentially maneuverability. Any unit that isn't fast and hard hitting and isn't tough enough to sit on an objective for at least 1 turn and take some focus and survive, if they don't fit into that category, they're a filler unit in this game. And you're going to use them for loads of other stuff. They're really, really important. Just because I'm saying they're a filler unit does not mean they're some of the most valuable units in your list. And as I said, this can be anything from Tactical Marines, Assault Marines, anything that you've taken that doesn't fit into the first 2 categories. Now, what can you use these guys for? Because I say they're really valuable, but in what purpose do they have? Well, the first thing you can use them for is you can use them to stop counter drops. Your opponent may have counter deep strikes or something like that, and what you'll do is you could potentially have a unit of 5 Tactical Marines, and you can run them forward to block out the 9-inch bubbles that an opponent's counter deep strike can't get within its rapid fire range, for example, of your Death Company unit. So your Death Company, although they'll eat some firepower, you're reducing the firepower that they'll take. So maybe you've got some scraps left that you can make use of later in the game. Maybe you've for whatever reason you want to make sure that your opponent can't position their forces in a certain area of the battlefield. You can use these filler units by clever positioning to block off areas of the battlefield. So you can run a 5-man infantry unit forward, knowing that from behind line of sight, a bit of line of sight blocking stuff, knowing that they're A, blocking a knight unit from moving forward, but B, that knight unit will just destroy them instantly, no problem whatsoever. But if you can slow that knight unit down, if that knight unit is forced to fire one of its few guns into those guys to clear those guys so he can charge a unit behind, or if he is forced because of the space between two bits of scenery to absolutely have to charge that tactical marine unit, or the last two tactical marines that you've just managed to get into position because you put like 3 little scraps in front of him and he can only wipe out 2 units and he's got to charge the third. If you can slow him down massively and maybe prevent him from moving 12 inches and charging a further 6 into your back lines, into some units that you're trying to keep safe, if you can stop him doing that, then you've played those units cleverly. If that's a Baal Predator that you're doing that same job with, then so be it. What I'm trying to say here is, and really underline, is that the most value you will get from these units is by very clever positioning and by absorbing firepower with these guys, so your other units that you want to use to claim objectives don't absorb as much firepower and hopefully survive. And that can be useful in a Maelstrom game. That can be useful in a variety of chapter-approved games where you score points every turn. There's a variety of situations where you may want to, move a Baal Predator, a unit of assault marines, and a couple of scraps of tactical marines, and just run them out into the open, exposed, just to try and defend an objective and get D3 points. And all of those guys are going to die, but let's face it, those guys are going to die anyway, because we are talking about a situation where your opponent's forces are really quite capable of destroying you and tearing you apart. So if they've got this mega death unit or variety of mega death units, give them some targets that they have to destroy so that they can move around the battlefield themselves, and then hold ground and rack up points with other maneuverable or other filler units. You've got these filler units spread, and you've spread your forces across the battlefield. Now you may deploy out of range. Although this may seem crazy to just deploy your shooting units out of range of them, if that forces them to move their units forward and start repositioning their gun line, for example, or repositioning their own screen that they've got against your deep strikers, if you're forcing them to move, there'll be cracks in their deployment, and then hopefully you can get a deep strike in. You can use a repositioning or a stratagem for 2 command points and redeploy 9 inches away and take that unit down with a charge and snatch at them, because that's what your fast and hard hitting units are going to do. So you're combining these sort of units together. You're using your filler units to basically control the battlefield. Whatever they would normally do, they are now the equivalent of a scout screen. That's what they're going to have to do now, because they've no other use to you. And then when your opponent makes a mistake, bang, hit them with a fast and hard hitting unit. Now we've analysed the situation, and we've categorised our units and evaluated what they can do for us over the course of the battlefield. So let's tie all of that together. How will this look over the phases of the game? Now, when you first deploy your forces, you may well want to deploy out of range with everything. Put yourself as far out from them as you can. If you're facing off against knights, they're going to be running at you, because knights' dirty little secret is they can't do all the damage they need to if they can only shoot at you. They need to get you in close combat as well. So although, you may have this opportunity to strike down and damage a knight, if you're looking at it and you're thinking, I haven't brought enough firepower to win this shooting match, then we've already said, don't try. So although your tactical marines, you may be tempted and think, I can just start picking at their infantry screens as they come towards me. If you have to set up out of range of them and they have to come to you and reposition, then do it. Now, I mentioned waiting until they reposition and waiting for them to make mistakes, but it's not all about that. You can't win a game just relying on waiting on your opponents to make mistakes. That's not what we're talking about here. But when you first deploy your forces, you need to be realistic, and you need to think, how much damage can I do and how much losses am I going to take? What are they going to do? Are they going to be coming at me, or are they going to be gun lining? If they're gun lining and you just stay out of range and you're playing a Maelstrom mission, then you've got all of your forces ready to redeploy, move around the battlefield and start grabbing objectives. If they're a knight's force that is going to need to attack you and shoot you, attack you in close combat and shoot you, then they've just got that much further to come before they can make use of every phase of the game. And until they get into charging range of you, they can only shoot you, so that halves the amount of damage that your forces will be taking. Believe me, a lot of knight armies can cross that 24 inches and get a first turn charge if you let them. So try and avoid that if you can. Now, that doesn't mean that you're just going to hide away in the shadows and hopefully just cling on to cover and wait until the game, all 7 turns have rolled down, because that's not going to win you the game either. If you just stay out of range and you don't use your forces in any way, then you're essentially going to be picked apart, because unfortunately you don't have the real world luxury of being able to just withdraw your forces from the battlefield. I mean, you can do, but that's just called quitting the game, which is not fun. You're here to have fun. You're here to play the game. So you are trapped on that 6 foot by 4 foot table, and essentially you are going to have to play. So you can't just stay out of range for the whole game. But what you're going to do is you are going to move your forces forward as the first few turns develop. And as the first phase of the game, the first turns 1 to 3, and especially turns 1 to 2 happens, what you're going to do is you're going to move your filler units up so that they are definitely in position to be able to grab you points. Now, you may be playing Maelstrom, or you may be playing a game where you score at the end of the turn, or the beginning of the turn, or at the end of the whole game. But whatever that is, you need to move, you need to assess the battlefield, look at bits of cover, look where the objectives are, look where the valuable parts of the battlefield are, and have enough units that are going to be able to rush that objective when the time is right, and have enough units that are able to move forward and expose themselves to close off a lane of movement from an enemy vehicle, or an enemy knight, or an enemy close range shooting unit, or an enemy deep strike destruction, death, murder unit that wants to deep strike in and rapid fire you. So you're going to have those filler units filling the battlefield, ready to put themselves where they need to be, whatever one of those roles is that you pick for them at the time. And you need to be super, super flexible. These units need to be ready to go. You're not worried about which ones die. You need to have enough spread out. And again, you don't want to necessarily put them all in range at once. So you might move a few of your forces forward in the first couple of turns, and a few of your forces forward in sort of turns 2 to 3. And you may have sort of 2 lines. So you've got your front lines in the midfield, and then your back lines. And that way, if they need to get to your back lines to totally wipe you out, they're forced to deal with the units in front of them first. And you have your fast units that can redeploy and grab objectives at the end of the game, safely out of the way and taking less firepower than your opponent would like to be giving them, because that you're just forcing their hand. So your opponent's still doing what they want to do, which is kill your units, but they're killing the units that you've chosen to be sacrificial. And you're also going to look, when you are striking them with your fast, hard-hitting units in turns 2 and 3, and you may not deep strike everything turn 2, you may space it out and keep some aces up your sleeve, but or when you're maybe teleporting a captain into the sky and redeploying him or something like that, when you're doing all of that stuff, you have to accept the fact that that stuff will probably die. And not only will it probably die, but it probably won't achieve what it would achieve in a normal game. It may not actually kill a unit outright like it normally would. And it may take 2 units. If you're playing against Eldar or Space Marines, there's more than one army out there that can just shoot a unit as it deep strikes in front of them and has enough firepower to wipe a unit out with that round of shooting. So you may have to knowingly reposition 2 units, deep strike 2 units down, maybe reposition a captain and deep strike unit, a death company from reserve. Know that one unit is going to eat it, but have judged and balanced that what you're targeting is going to set you up efficiently for the late game. You're not able to do your normal assault. You're still going to assault and you're still going to make use of those units. You're not going to hide and run around for the entire game, but you're just going to accept the fact that you're going to take heavy losses. So those heavy losses have to have a very specific purpose. That, yeah, okay, so you've taken 2-1 losses, 3-1 losses, but when it comes to turn 6 and you knew you needed to hold that objective 36 inches away from their gun line, and they no longer have that 36 inch range weaponry, because that's the one thing that you destroyed, even though it took everything you had to do it, then so be it. And I'm not saying that's always the best way, but essentially you still want to fight that fight. You're still a blood angel. You still need to kill stuff, and you can't be a total coward. But any sacrifice that you make has to be a worthy sacrifice to the cause, if that makes sense. Sacrifice your men's lives, not sort of in a foolhardy manner. The context will vary every single game, every single time, and it depends, because there's so many opponents out there with lists that are just absolutely devastating in terms of their damage output and so tough in terms of their survivability. But if you can do the damage that you can, so that you can hold the objectives that you need to hold at the end of the game, then you'll be there. If you can grab as many points as you can throughout the course of the game by constantly running units around and constantly blocking off their maneuverability, then you're halfway there. So your end goal ultimately is that your opponent is going to kill chunks of your force, but they're going to make little strategic gain despite all of that firepower. You will deal blows to their force that remove units that stop you achieving your goals, and you're also going to strike at targets of opportunity. Now, remember, another thing to destroy is units that are maneuverable. It's really important that you destroy units that are also maneuverable, because if they're able to reposition and counter reposition and stop you doing that final grab, then you're in real trouble. So you need to balance between actually being able to survive sitting on those objectives and sitting on those objectives even being worth it, because, they just counter deployed you anyway, counter redeployed rather, in the last turn of the game. So, I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you found it entertaining, and I hope it's given you some ideas for how you can actually take on an opponent that's brought a nasty list that is here to do some serious damage to you. So this has been the Schola Progenium. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.